Assemblyman Ting, because California is one of those states that's trying to make voting actually look like we live in the 21st century as opposed to the 19th century. So I was hoping you could talk, Assemblyman, about the reforms that California has adopted in the past few years at a time when so many states are making it harder to vote. California has done some really interesting things to make it easier for people to vote.
Well, thanks, Ari, and again, thanks to the Brennan Center, and thanks to all of you for coming to California and for Netroots Nation for being here this year. Many of the things that I think Nicole brought up, fortunately, are already outlawed or are not happening here in California. So we're very, very proud of that. And in many ways, we are trying to push the envelope to I wouldn't even say make it 21st century, almost make it like a 20th century elections process.
One century at a time.
I would take 20th century at this point. You know, two of the major reforms that we've seen adopted that were very exciting, and we saw how much they changed the election. One was this last election, the 6 weeks before the November presidential election, we started to allow online voter registration. And in that 6-week time period, if you can imagine, 6-week time period, we had 1 million voters register online, 1 million. And what was great wasn't just that voters registered, but they actually voted. And that the returns were phenomenal. 85% of those voters, that 1 million, cast a ballot. 80% of 18 to 29-year-olds who register online cast a ballot, the lowest voting population in the country. Rural California counties like Kern and Fresno increased turnouts up to 85 to 90% of those people who cast ballots who registered online. So what we're seeing wasn't just that people took that initial action, but they actually followed through. And you know, what I would just appeal to all of you, you know, who are here today, is how much technology could really revolutionize voting. Nicole mentioned it. The portability of voting is really not dependent on us as people, but really dependent on government and technology. And the ability to port is really a technology problem. It's not anything else. It's a technology and it's a business process problem. It's a willingness for the Secretary of States and the county elections officials to work together to allow that portability to happen, whether it's on a statewide basis or even on a nationwide basis. The other thing that's, I think, very, very exciting to see is that we are moving toward same-day voter registration, same-day voting. And what's interesting is part of that big challenge for us is being able to implement a statewide voter database. Because one of the hurdles is how do we know that if I'm walking into the ballot in to my ballot, my voting polling place in San Francisco, whether I'm doing it in Colma or Daly City, whether or not I can really go do that. And again, the Secretary of State is working on making sure that there is a statewide database to really make sure that's happening. And the returns are going to be very, very similar. Why should we care? But more and more voter participation is really going to occur. That the estimated turnout from 18 to 25-year-olds, and this is just in California, is going to be up 9%. The turnout for people who moved in the last 6 months is going to be up about 7.3%. Turnouts for Latinos and newly naturalized citizens will be up about 5%. This is a study done by Demos that I'm quoting. So again, there's huge value to be implemented. There's a lot at risk. So one of the proposals, and I think the reason that I was asked to be here today, was I tried to push not just online voter registration, but online voting in California, and to try to move a pilot project here in California. And what was amazing is how much opposition I got, not from the conservatives, but really from the progressive community on that issue, and that they were so fearful and outraged about online voting, but yet didn't share any of that outrage about voting in lines, waiting in lines, about voter disenfranchisement, about many of the things that we see are real barriers to voting. And they were concerned about, I think, very legitimate issues like security, like fraud, things that obviously we need to iron out, and that I committed to working with them to iron out. But to me, again, the point is that government so often is the last adopter of technology, and that technology in this front around voting could make such a huge difference to evening the playing field, to making it easier. Could you imagine if credit card companies treated us the way elections officials treat us? How many people would have credit cards? How many people would have credit cards? How many people would buy cell phones? How many people would buy, I think what what Justin said, how many people would actually engage in the consumer behavior if we put all these barriers in front of them? So it's no wonder why we have such low voter turnout. We just had an elections race in Los Angeles for the mayor, the most widely known figure in LA. We had a turnout of 23%. 23%.
Right, and that was high.
Right. So again, we have so far to go, and I think that we have to really look at technology. So again, I think online voting is just a very simple idea. It's just taking the idea of everything that we do already on a cell phone or on our laptop and really trying to move it online. Now again, I'm the first to admit that there are numerous hurdles in terms of making sure there's security, there's fraud, making sure that that is going, which is why we talked about making it a pilot program. It's amazing because countries like Estonia are already doing it. 25% of the population in Estonia votes online. They vote online. States like West Virginia, Arizona have already started looking at it, so I would love to say that California is leading the way. We're not. We're actually following others. But again, it's really making sure that, and I think this is what Netroots Nation is all about, is really making sure that the technology can be used for greater citizen participation, for greater communication, for greater participation. Because ultimately, right now, what is at risk is our democracy. And the fewer people who are participating, the less our democracy really looks like our population, but really like the select few that were sort of enshrined to vote back when the founders first founded our great country. So I think it's so important that that anger not just be targeted at online voting or security, but that anger be targeted at long lines, that the anger be targeted at voter IDs, that the anger be targeted to make sure that people can and should be allowed to vote the same day. We have same-day voter registration and same-day voting. So all these things are very much within our grasp, but it really requires all of us. It really requires all of you. It requires all the folks watching at home or on their computer to be involved, to really show that same kind of interest, that level of participation, because people are listening. People in my positions, we listen. We are influenced by who calls us, who writes to us, who comes knocking on our door. So if you don't, then your voice is not part of that dialogue, part of that discussion. And so again, like I said, I urge you, if you care about increasing voter participation, you're interested in looking at greater ways to do online voting, please, work with me, contact our office, participate, be part of that solution. Because again, technology is not going to get adopted because some bureaucrat decided to make it happen. Technology is going to get adopted because we force cities, counties, the federal government to do it, because we demanded that change. We demanded that government look much more like the rest of our lives, and that we want government to make that operation much more customer friendly, much more customer service oriented, and that we are demanding access back to our democracy. I think there's no question that there will be a swift and rapid response if the decision doesn't go our way. But what I would say is, and I think a number of other panelists already talked about it, but even if the decision goes our way, that even more reason to take all that energy that was ready to roll on a federal level to, again, what Taka talked about, which is to look at it at a statewide level, to target the secretaries of states who set the elections policies for every state in the country, and to look at various county elections officials all around the country. Because really, they have a much larger impact and footprint to whether the election goes well or not than the federal government. While the Voting Rights Act is extraordinarily important, and it's been the foundation for how we've accessed and created rights for so many citizens. It's absolutely critical. We need to take the next step and really look at many of these tools. Again, our democracy is failing. You don't have to look at it any other way, like we talked about. Look at the turnout, whether you're in a presidential election. Even this year, for a presidential re-election, we had extraordinarily overall low turnout. For local elections that are extraordinarily important, we were able to earn a 2/3 majority in California of Democrats. And the reason that's important is we're one of the only states in the union which needs a 2/3 requirement to pass a budget and a 2/3 requirement to raise taxes. So we actually sort of did the impossible. We have 2/3 in both houses. But one of those races that flipped on the very last day. The Republican was actually ahead all the way till the end, till the Democrat won by 125 votes on the last day of counting. And can you imagine if we didn't have online voter registration? I just told you, 1 million people across the state. How many votes would have been lost? We had, the reason we had an on-time budget that was balanced is in November, the voters passed Proposition 30, which was a temporary sales tax and income tax across the state. Added about $7 billion to our budget. So if that didn't happen, I would have had to go up in December and cut $7 billion instead of fighting over a couple million here to add to the budget. The reason that's important is up till 2 weeks before the election, Proposition 30 looked like it was going to fail. It was down in the polls, 48%. So anybody who looks at a ballot measure that says 48%, how did it pass by 50, I think it was 53 or 54%? Well, it passed because when you look at polling, you poll who you think is going to come out to vote. Well, when you have 1 million newly registered voters, they don't get polled. Their opinions aren't counted. And so that decision, that technology flipped our election. Moved to more democratic, was able to pass for the first time in decades an actual tax increase for the state of California. So again, these tools impact real life decisions. This is not, we're not having a theoretical discussion up here. These are things that will impact elections, and the elections, don't get me wrong, will absolutely impact our day-to-day lives. Because again, if we don't have that $7 billion tax increase, it's cutting education, it's cutting public safety, it's cutting transportation, cutting public health, cutting Medicare, cutting Medi-Cal. I mean, those, I'll tell you, all those things would have happened. We would have no choice. So again, I mean, you know, that effort that we need to stay vigilant to defend the rights that we have, but also to make sure that we increase those rights and fight for that democracy to make sure that we have the turnout that we want, we have the citizen participation we want, and we have the engagement that we want. And it really is up to us. Thank you.